We are back with the SPL week number 4 and game number 2 here on Saturday afternoon, and we've got another close one with the Knights taking on the Renegades. Mifflin is with me, still on the desk, to talk about this matchup. Miff, I think just briefly, we have to now get kind of we've taken a deep breath, snap reactions on set number 1, because that's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, my jaw was dropped the entire time. Let's calm down a little bit. Let's focus in what's about to happen, which is PK versus Renegades.
And again, as I sort of bring up, this is another close matchup, but kind of on the other end of the spectrum. A team in the Knights that a lot of people had questions around. Can they be more consistent? And a team in the Renegades, did they make the right swaps to really have a better showing here this season? Well, right now, the answer has been no to both of those, 6 and 7 respectively in the standings, 1 and 3 for both teams. So this is a matchup where both teams will be looking to leapfrog one another when it comes to the standings. But let's talk about the Knights, Mifflin. And it's so interesting to kind of look at least a couple of the stats when it comes to this team, because Knights, despite being 1 and 3, they've had some 3-game sets and have 2 of the bottom 5 deaths in the league in Paul and Scary D. So they're a team that, while they've only won 1 set, they don't really die a lot necessarily in the meantime.
I mean, the Knights have been looking incredibly good all year. Zapman's been popping off. Paul's having a fantastic year. He's got these unorthodox picks out of mid. I think it's worth pointing out, though, the only win Knights have found have been against Obey, whereas Renegades, their 1 win has been against United. So now Knights have to really prove that they can take some games off of these higher contending teams. Maybe that's weighing a little bit on their thought process this match.
And maybe it's too overhead and too generic, because there's obviously so much around this team, or maybe that's an overstatement. I'm going both ways with it. But if you kind of look at one aspect of this team, who do you think has really stepped up? Do you think Zapman has kind of been the big guy for them? I think Neil has played a pretty big role as well.
My eyes are constantly on Paul. If he finds one of his priority picks, if he gets on the Paul Bow or the Paul Hell, even his Uller has been incredibly good. He's one of these guys where you associate that god with him. I think that really does speak volumes of what he brings to this team. He is a huge reason they find their dubs. He's a huge reason that a lot of these games are going longer than they need to, and it's because Paul is a huge asset. My eyes are certainly on him, but you can't take it away from, as you said, Zapman and Neil have both been having a fantastic season. They find early aggression in that lane. They have very good first blood potential. These guys are all nuts.
Well, Paul is top half of the league when it comes to kills in that mid lane role. 36, just one behind Dardas in that second place spot, but Shinto at 64 in first. He's kind of blowing everyone out of the water. This is a team that's going to look to get some momentum going. We've talked a little bit about Neil and what he's brought to the table, and we were able to talk to him prior to this matchup against the Renegades.
All right, now we're here with Neil from the Knights. And you guys are going to be going up against the Renegades. We can jump into that in just a little bit. But first, I want to ask about the Knights specifically. You know, last year, it was an interesting, I want to say, journey for the team going forward. But most recently, you won Worlds. And so far this season, that hasn't maybe turned around into a lot of W's for you. You're 1 and 3 right now. So how is everybody kind of taking this season and approaching Season 7?
Yeah, well, nobody likes to lose, obviously. We're all pretty competitive people, but at the end of the day, we kind of have a similar mindset to last year. I think we have a little bit higher standards than last year, though. I think even last year when we were like 7th seed, we were not pleased with where we were, but at the end of the day, it's about improving, right? And as long as our team is improving, we're all really happy. And I think that through practice last few weeks, we've been noticing we've been improving a lot. We've been watching our sets back. We noticed, like, it's not like we don't know how to play the game. We're making 1 or 2 mistakes or like a draft error or something like that. And it's like, we can fix these things, right? These are things that we can fix, and we should win these games if we fix these things. So going forward, as long as we keep improving and keep fixing these things and it starts translating to wins, I don't think anyone is going to be too upset, because it is a long year and it really matters when you get good. So overall, I think we're not super pleased with the standings, but the results I don't think necessarily reflect our improvement as of past weeks. So we'll see going forward if that pays off.
That was actually something when I was looking up and doing some research to put questions into this, I was surprised to see that both you and Renegades are 1 and 3. So it's like, man, they've been playing so well. And the fact that I think, you know, out of it, the the standard that we have in the SPL this year has kind of risen up, right? Even the teams that are undefeated hardly make mistakes. The same thing can be said for y'all. It just comes down to maybe one issue coming down, and that's been the make or break for Renegades as well. And they've been looking pretty strong. I want to know, what exactly is your opinion on the way they look right now coming into this season? It's definitely been a different swing than what we got out of them last year.
Yeah, I'm definitely impressed with how they've been playing so far. Like you said, every team in the league seems really competitive. Anyone can kind of get wins. It just depends on who makes less mistakes. And I think Awesome Jake's been really impressive so far during the league. I think when I watched a few of the early games, he did make like a few mistakes and got picked here and there, but that's not like anything easy to do to come into the SPL and as a support and make no mistakes. That was kind of expected, but he's really impressed me so far. And as a team, I think they do a lot of really good things, but they just need to iron out some of the mistakes, and they'll be a really competitive team, yeah.
And that's actually, I'm really happy you mentioned Jake, because I wanted to zone in kind of where you will be, which is that duo lane over there. And admittedly, there's a lot of discussion around like the 3v3 in mid, having to dance around with the jungler and the mid laner. But most of the starting off, like you're going to be seeing Zap versus Bara, which is, iconic in Smite's been going on for years. But this will be the first time in a while that you guys have been able to go against Barracuda sans Jeff Hindla, right? Now you have Awesome Jake over there. So how is that going to affect the duo lane matchup? Do you think it's going to change the style that you and Zap are bringing over there?
I don't think Zap and I care who we're playing against. We just go into a game with our own strategy, our own draft, and we'll play the lane like however we think it should be played, regardless who you're against. We're not going to take anyone lightly or have anyone intimidate us. We're just going to have our picks and look at their picks and say, this is how we should play the lane. I think that Jake brings a lot more aggressiveness to that team than Jeff would have in the duo lane, just because of his character pool. That's nothing against Jeff or nothing for Jake. I just think it's a play style difference, and they usually like playing high pressure stuff. So we'll see how that goes today.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see. Again, the aggression that comes around, we've seen a lot of pressure at solo lane. We've seen a lot of pressure in the duo lane, and a lot of pressure, I would argue, onto the supports to make sure things stay kind of solid for everybody and that the setup is there. But it's going to be an interesting set. I know a lot of people are excited to see this one because of what it could mean. So good luck in your games, and have a good day.
Awesome. Thanks very much. You too.
Always great to talk to Neil a little bit, and he makes a good point. This is a team in the Knights that have only lost 3 times, and 2 of those 3 losses have been 3-game sets. One against SSG, a team that a lot of people have very high in their rankings, and against Rival, now a team at the top of the league in the standings, or tied at least. So a team that maybe Mifflin, if they clean up some of these mistakes, clean up some of these game 3s, we'd be looking at a totally different set of standings. Do you agree with some of that sentiment where the Knights are a few cleaned up mistakes away from being one of these top teams?
When I view Knights, they have a fantastic early game, and their late game is really good. The mid game is where they find their stumbles. They make these few mistakes. And hearing Neil in that interview, it seems like he's identified that issue as well. And if he said they're working on it and they should start winning going forward, I trust him. They can easily make those adjustments, and we've already seen that they are a high-end team. They, as you said, they take all these top tiers to the 3-game sets. They're all incredibly close matches. Saying that Knights, even though they haven't had the specific wins, the standings don't really reflect it, they are an incredibly potent squad.
Well, it's time to talk about the Knights' opponent in the Renegades here today to round out our day in the SPL, and a team that I kind of want to keep the conversation going around the duo lane, because after recent changes with the Invader's Curse, obviously, in the jungle, we've seen a return back to more of this traditional duo lane start. Now, I like the question Gore brought up. Have you sensed a difference in Barracuda's play style, or kind of the vibe in that long lane now that he's no longer with Jeff Tinla?
He seems a lot more feral. Is that the right word? He seems wild in this lane.
Like a druid.
A lot of aggression, a lot of jumping in, something that I wasn't used to seeing from him in prior seasons. He's playing a lot more proactively, and it's reflecting a lot. Now when I think of the Renegades, it's the Lasbra Bara squad. These two are having a fantastic year so far, and it's going to continue going forward. The meme right now, Vintage Barracuda, in no means a slight. He was at one point considered the absolute best player in the world, and I think he's starting to reach that peak again this year.
Perfect that you bring up Lasbra, and a lot of the highlights with this Renegade squad are going to be from Lasbra. He is top 5 in the league in kills right now, in the 5th spot, just behind some of the other junglers in Panatom, Sam for Soccer. But it can't be understated, I don't think, of what Lasbro's brought to this team, and I think it's a real fighting chance in a lot of these games.
Lasbra to the Renegades is almost like Sam for Soccer's dynamic in that if he gets a good start in the early game, the entirety of Renegades are going to follow suit. And he's been able to consistently do it. He brings out these sumo or pseudo unorthodox picks. Pele has been seeing a little bit more focus than we've had in the past, but Lasbra was one of the first ones to pick it up, and he's been finding this early aggression. It seems like a lot of his picks happen in the enemy jungle, and he operates as a solo agent, not only in the early game, but also in late game team fights. I'm a huge fan of Lasbra's style, and I think he's going to be able to see continuous success with it.
Lasbro looked to add a few deaths to the column of Paul and Scary D, who, as I've mentioned, are tied for second fewest deaths in the league at 16. Now, the lane opponent for Scary D today will be Solo or Troll. How is he feeling prior to this matchup? Listen and find out.
All right, well, we're here with Solo or Troll, as you can imagine, solo laner for Renegades. You're going to be playing up against the Knights. But before we get into the match that you're going to be playing today, I just want to, talk to you about the Renegades this year. So far, the team has been looking pretty good. They've been playing well. Even if the results haven't always been a W, I just want to know, how's the team been feeling these last few weeks?
Team's been feeling great. I mean, after the losses, this team doesn't take it hard at all. We're like, we know we play well. We know we could win those games. It sucks, but I mean, it's not the end of the world. We didn't get stomps. As long as the games are winnable, then it's not a big deal. I mean, we can just come back stronger next time. So it's been great, honestly.
Get them into the realm of winnable, and then just tackle that last little bit of hurdle. And I like that because it shows the growth and I think the work that the team is putting in behind the scenes that we don't always get to see, the scrims, the practice, all of that. But, looking at the meta right now, a lot of things have shifted. Specifically, last week, we saw a lot of early game ganks to solo lane. Solo laners were just under duress pretty much the entire time. So I want to know, is that, one, something you expect to maybe have to deal with this week? But also how that affects, lane mentality, the control that you have on the lane, and how you take maybe getting ganked early on and potentially dying off early and translating that into a late game where you can be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always careful of ganks. In rank, that happens all the time. I verse Sino, and he just ganks me level 2. After speed buff, he just comes straight to lane. I've seen a few strats where, the junglers just go straight to lane because the solo laners start blue, and they're going to be level 1, and the jungler's level 2. So I'm always kind of keeping careful of that. But if it does happen, it's unfortunate. It happened, I think, game 1 versus Sanguine, but we still kind of came back. So as long as I can just kind of chill out and not push up too far, and yeah, it should be fine.
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting thing. The side lane control has been very important, and specifically solo lane with the transitions into late game being very, very solid. And you're going to be going up again. We mentioned the Knights, but specifically Scary D in that matchup, and you'll have to deal with the junglers coming around. But for the most part, you'll be kind of in that isolated 1v1. And I want to know, does the side lane specifically in this matchup, do you think that's going to kind of make or break the win? Do you think that you are the determining factor, or does that come maybe elsewhere on the map?
I think it comes elsewhere. Maybe Barracuda, but I feel like everyone else has been popping off, so I feel like my job isn't really to pop off. It's kind of just to help them pop off. I feel like. I mean, I guess there are games where I could pop off, but I feel like I don't really need to. I'm obviously still trying my best, and I feel like I'm still playing decent, but I think everyone else has been stepping up really hard. So, yeah.
So specifically, the fact that you're going to have to deal with Scary D and Cuvo, is there any specific style that they maybe bring to the game that you're going to have to kind of shift up to deal with, or do you think it's going to be not necessarily the same standard that you bring, but you're just going to come in and kind of do your own thing?
I think I'm just going to do my own thing. I mean, I always try to adapt versus every player, obviously, but I think I'm just trying to do my own thing. There's probably a few things that they might do differently than other junglers and solo laners, but they're relatively the same, or kind of standard, I guess. So I'm just gonna do my own thing.
Well, hey, it's looking like it's going to be a really fun game and fun set to watch. So I'm excited for it. I'm sure everybody is as well. So good luck in your games, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, the Renegades are a team similar to the Knights, that they have 3 losses, but only one of them has come in a 3-game set, and that one was up against Sanguine, but that's the difference now between a 2-2 start and a 1-3 start here for the Renegades, but it is the latter for both of the teams in our second matchup of the day. Mifflin, do you think in picks and bans there needs to be an emphasis on any one particular role in this matchup?
Maybe you don't have to ban him out, but I said it earlier. Paul, if he finds these comfort picks, if he can maybe work his way through getting Odin off the table and finds his way into a hell, I think PK could really run with that. If I'm Renegades and I know that Paul is the crux of PK's strategy, we want to make sure that he's as uncomfortable as possible. So if Renegades decide to maybe have some early aggression in their comp, pick one of these bridge junglers like Robin or Erlang, Thor, or something that can really make sure that the mid laner can't get off to a good start, that would be a fantastic way to really see how PK can respond outside of have to play through the mid laner.
And I am very curious as well if the Knights will start to put an emphasis on maybe Lasbra in some of these picks and bans, similar to maybe what Radiance was trying to do with Sam, but Lasbra has also shown that he'll play the Susanos, he'll play some of the off-meta picks, I suppose, if they're available, but it's been the Hoonbots, he hasn't had to really overextend, Lasbra hasn't, into a super absurd jungler pool up to this point. Xing Qin takes the first ban, hell maybe towards Paul, maybe just because she's very good for the Renegades with their first ban. And I was wondering when maybe we would start to see some Horus trickle into these ban phases.
And the Horus ban makes sense. Jake has shown, and he was a very early adapter of the god, that he is incredibly comfortable on Horus. Forcing him off of these priority picks is going to be really nice. Xing Shen and Horus are both gods that we've seen Jake pilot so far. Interesting to point out that PK seems to be focusing out that duo lane. Maybe they want to force their aggression over in long.
That's a Yemoja as well, so a god that we got to see a little bit in our first set of the day. I'm wondering how much, again, you kind of look towards emphasis around different parts of this map. Gore talked to Solo or Troll, and he was sort of like, hey, I imagine we'll be out kind of on an island this game, maybe some jungle ganks here and there, but most of it is just going to be this kind of wet noodle fighting, and then eventually we start to rotate in. Have there been any solo laners that maybe start to jump out at you? I really have liked the kind of off-pick of the Amaterasu every once in a while when she's been let through, and the rotation potential from her, despite a loss, looked good for Radiance in our second game of the day.
If SOT is going to do as he said and play for the late game as a facilitator, it's very likely we see a Guardian come out of solo lane. We might see Jormungandr, something that's really not going to look to pressure out his own lane, and he has good rotations out. If he really wants to, he could even look towards a Thor solo and have him help out in that mid lane, get some pressure over there. PK picking up this Ullr early means that it is a decent flex pick. Could go mid, could go into the long lane, but either way, no matter where it goes, you're looking for immediate pressure. Morgan.
All right, well, here we go, Mifflin. Morgan now allowed to be picked up, and the Renegades will take up that opportunity for the first time in the SPL. Was banned out just a little bit. This will be the first Morgan pick for the Renegades. Still some flexibility in that pick as well, but what are expectations for the first time we'll see Morgan?
I'm expecting it absolutely to go mid. It's going to have a lot more pressure there than Hachiman would have, and from there, you're looking to just farm up, get to that late game, and once you do reach that late game, you can operate as almost a pseudo Loki. You're going to look for stealth, you're going to look to blow up Merlin as quickly as possible, and then immediately transform into something that has team fight potential. Could turn yourself into the Merlin, could turn yourself into this Ullr and look for another pick. It's one of the most mechanically demanding gods in the game simply because you're not just playing the Morgan, you're playing literally everyone in the lobby. Kind of hard to think about. I'm excited to see it. It's going to struggle a little bit in the early game, and PK picking up this Bacchus means that they can exploit Morgan's early game incredibly well.
And it could be, and Morgan also potentially a little insurance if somebody from the Knights really starts to go crazy, you have that transformation. And I wondered if Susano would come out here for Lasbra, something I brought up when talking about the jungle priority in this picks and bans. And there you have it for the Renegades. Talk about a late game 1v1 high potential god, and you've got it in Susano.
And his early game still incredibly good as well. Once he gets the pull online, once his first 3 abilities are online, he could rotate into mid, displace this Merlin, get the immediate CC follow-up from Morrigan. There's a lot that Susano can do, and his mobility makes it very easy for him to find his ganks anywhere. We've seen Susano getting a lot of his leads out of the solo lane, able to gank out there very easily and not have to trade too much of his own resources. This god is incredible, and since Renegades do get their jungler in the first 3 picks, it does open them up to ban out some junglers from the Knights. Hunbots and Surcat get taken away.
I think that's a strong round of bans there from the Renegades, especially if you're trying to limit Cuvo Fred and you know, maybe hasn't kept pace with Lasbra, and it probably is very hard to do when he's so high up on that kill list. But still a jungler that we talk kind of bits and pieces of the Knights and how everyone has been playing their role for this team. I think Cuvo has slotted in nicely here for the Knights so far.
He has. He hasn't been the absolute hard carry that we've been seeing from these other teams, but he is playing around his squad incredibly well, and he's facilitating these hyper carries that he does have on Knights. You see Cuvo play very well around Zapman in the team fights. You see him diving with Paul very often. He's been playing really well, and even in years prior, he was considered one of the, if not the best jungler, and he's continually seeing that level of success. Cuvo brings a certain level of consistency that a lot of other junglers don't have.
Well, Cuvo has been, you know, kind of consistently middle of the pack when it comes to stats, at least, and stats don't always tell the whole story. It's going to open the door to the Pele, though, and remember him and Sam kind of swapped teams in the offseason. Sam for Soccer putting on a Pele clinic in just the previous game. Now an Amaterasu, another god that we saw in our previous game. What do you like here in this Pele pick for Cuvo?
I like what it brings in the 3v3. You have the Bacchus for engage. Merlin's going to have consistent damage output from a range, and Pele's going to bring that huge burst. If they really focus up the Knights, that is, in the early game, they can make sure that this Morgan doesn't really come to fruition until maybe the 25-minute mark. That's not what you're going to want. On the other hand, Renegades have some level of CC. They have a little bit of peel, but not enough if they really want to keep this Morgan safe. This Osiris pickup is interesting. Maybe this Jormungandr flexes to the Guardian role?
And that's something we haven't seen Yorm do a whole lot here recently. Do you like him in that Guardian role?
I'm not the biggest fan. Usually when you have a support, you want this huge CC, this initiator, and Jormungandr doesn't bring that much. Osiris could as well go there, but it's yet to be seen.
Well, it's our second matchup of the day and our second close matchup of the day. Knights, Renegades. Let's kick off game number 1.
Two teams down at 1-3, struggling to find a bit of momentum. The Knights, the defending champs, up against the Renegades with a new look. And I was thinking that we might see this. You heard Mifflin kind of give that possibility towards the end of that desk, but it looks like it's going to be Osiris for Awesome Jake. It's Finch and Goremizer here. And Gore, doesn't this Osiris feel more like an Awesome Jake pick than the Jormungandr? Something aggressive that he can scrap with early.
Yeah, I mean, very similar to when you see Tier locked in for Renegades. I guess Warriors are kind of the any pick, at least it feels like for Jake. And admittedly, you can look at what he's bringing. He's going to have some anti-heal when the ult comes online, but he has a stun. He has the ability to slow. If you get aggressive in this lane, you can chase Zap down and lock him down, and it kind of seems like that's what Jake wants.
He blinked in there early, didn't he, Gore? But not a whole lot came from it. In fact, he probably took a bit more poke. But he got what he wanted, right? Look how quickly they cleared this wave out. So now they're the ones with lane pressure here on the left-hand side. And to zoom out a bit, not to get too mired down in how the lane is bouncing back and forth, but I think that this Osiris in the support role is not that bad of an idea. How different is it from the Hercules that we saw, the Erlang Shen? He does have some setup tools, and it gives them a chance to fight in this early game, and they're going to need it. Look at all this burst that the Knights have with the Ullr, with the Bacchus, with this Pele. They need something that can fight them early on.
And it's a very interesting kind of dynamic because, you know, Hercules has displacement tools, right? He's going to pull you to him. He brings you into the fight. Whereas this Osiris is going to stop you from running away. So they still need to have the control that they have on the lane right now. If they start to lose it, if they lose this pressure, all of a sudden you're not going to be able to see Awesome Jake chase people down anymore. Maybe it gives them more room since there's more lane before the tower shows up. Either way, it's going to be very kind of impactful based on that slow and where he's going. And normally I'd also be looking at the fact that he can walk through walls and at least like get not body blocked as something big, because that could help him get away from ganks.
Early gank here from Cubo Fred. The knockup was there from Neil Ma, and Cubo cleans it up easy peasy. And this is something that Cubo Fred likes to do. You heard them talking on the desk a bit about how Cubo Fred, maybe used to be considered in that top tier, but he's been kind of middle of the road here this year. Well, that is exactly what the Knights ordered. Cubo Fred getting involved early and often.
And if you're looking to try and strip away the absolute clear that they're going to have, the fact that they had so much control in that duo lane, best way to do it is just go kill one of them. What's Barra going to be able to do on his own over here? They have to fall back, kind of treat this at their own pace, and it's a great equalizer. I mean, for Zap, the main goal here is just going to be play until you hit that late game Wooler, play until you can be that guy that rotates in and just absolutely shreds everybody, or find some 1v1s against Barra. Play until Awesome Jake leaves the lane for the 3v3 in mid, and until then, you need a little bit of assistance kind of balancing that out, and I think Cubo getting that gank early has absolutely let them have that equilibrium.
And now some pressure onto the blue buff. This is Renegades looking for a potential buff invade onto the Order side of the map. Scary D and Cubo both here, so it's just a 2-on-2. But Scary a bit lower on HP, pulled back in by Lasbra, who's had a great season so far, but it could all come tumbling down here. Solar Troll makes it a 1-for-1, but that's huge. They got that kill on the Lasbra, and Cubo Fred is still alive.
It's going to be even better. Jungle for solo. Scary D is going to be able to come back in, has his teleport available, so it's going to affect him, but not as badly as it's going to end up affecting Lasbra. Now you have Cubo with a kill under his belt. You have Lasbra maybe falling a little bit behind in farm. His rotation's been kind of messed up a little bit. It's going to be difficult.
Finally, Solar Troll ends up leaving it alone. But you're right. I think that the difference in terms of how those deaths end up impacting them, it's going to make life harder for Scary D in lane, that's for sure. And Ama can already get a bit bullied in those early levels sometimes. But Cubo Fred getting a bit accelerated over Lasbra is a really big deal. This Pele, I think, really wants to be able to come online here towards the tail end of the early in that mid game and see if she can outclass Lasbra, who we know is going to be a late game monster on the Susano. That feels like a big deal to me.
And I was looking at it, and even looking at the XP that you can see in the bottom left there, realistically, the main beneficiary of this actually ended up being Solar Troll. I guess Lasbra not being around gets him, nice solo experience, or a little bit more, at least it feels like, for him. He hit that level 5 first, and while Lasbra did fall a little behind, it's not so much right now that he's crying over it. And so I think it's still something you can fight into. Normally I would expect it to hurt him a little bit more, but it feels like Cubo, especially with the way the rotations have been going in gank heavy, would normally be just very barely ahead. But with that speed buff invade, now the experience camp's going away, that's a good read by the Knights to just make sure that Lasbra not only fell behind, but stays behind. He does not have the tools necessary to kind of even the gap now as this Pele starts to take the reins.
And I feel like the reason we initially saw that maybe the gap didn't expand the way you would expect is because Solar Troll kept threatening blue. That kind of forced Cubo Fred to stay near that blue buff instead of going off to farm during what would have been downtime for Lasbra as Neil Ma forces out the beads from Venenu in the middle lane. But as you mentioned, that speed buff invade did kind of help push things back in Cubo Fred's favor. I do think it's worth mentioning, though, that bit of pressure in mid from Neil is pretty important. We already talked about how Morgan kind of likes to delay. She wants to come online a bit later, but she can have some extra movement speed and CDR built in from itemization. And now she's a little bit less safe in that middle lane thanks to Neil's good work.
God, and I love Morgan. I love the base state of Morgan because there's so many, options available, right? I mean, hey, we need to melt a Fire Giant late game. Cool, I can become the Merlin over there. Hey, I need to be able to steal away this Gold Fury. Okay, cool, I'm going to change into the box. It's like the play capabilities that Ven is going to have throughout this game are just endless, and that's going to be something the Knights have to put a cap on early. It was mentioned in the desk. You just mentioned it now. And I'm kind of surprised to see they aren't pressuring him out so heavily. They're instead putting a lot of emphasis on this right-hand side.
See if they can strip away the blue buff. Looks like they weren't quite able to grab it. Now Scary D, who's low HP, could be in some trouble. The knockup is there. Lasbra here to capitalize, but Scary D has a knockup, or a little bit of backup of his own. He is able to escape, but in comes the Jormungandr ultimate, looking for that last bit of damage. But at this point, it is a rather jukeable ultimate when that's the only thing you're worried about. Yeah. So Scary D should be out of there safely. SOT couldn't find that trade.
And I like the call. I think SOT being aggressive there is fun. It is going to make him a little bit more vulnerable now, though. Scary D staying alive. He can back. His teleport's coming up in just a few seconds, so healing's not going to be an issue. Of course, he's also Ama, so he can just sustain in lane for a little bit by stance switching. and that opens it up for another gank. Cuvo potentially looking over here, can absolutely lock down Solar Troll for the next minute now as the cooldown starts to tick down on that ult. So Solar Troll maybe being able to get something out of that, but like you said, a pretty easily juked ult that came through. I want to see what the Knights are able to do with it, because I think Cuvo should be able to recognize this. Very similar to pulling someone's beads. Press the aggression and see what you can get out of it now that you've forced him to use his safety.
I like that Neil Maul is lurking here on the left, though Zapman doesn't have a ton of mana at his disposal right this moment. There might not be a lot more that can come from it, especially with this big rotation from the Renegades. They'll have to give this aggression up on the left-hand side for now. And so, Gore, the question becomes then, where do you expect to see? I mean, I think we've identified it's probably the Knights that are going to be the aggressors here in the early game, but where do you expect to see them going? I wouldn't mind seeing them fight around this Ullr, and with Awesome Jake here, maybe there's some trouble, but no blink or anything like that. Zapman's out. Do you want to see Knights playing around Zap or Neil, or where do you want to see this?
Man, it's really weird because it feels like they're trying to figure it out themselves, right? Like there's an early gank onto the duo lane to help Zap stay afloat and get ahead. There's some ganks over here onto the right-hand lane to make sure that Scary D doesn't fall too far behind. And we've been talking the entire time about potentially trying to shut down Vin, and they seem to be ignoring mid, and it's going well. Paul has a little bit of a lead on Venenu, so it's not too much of an issue. I think the key right now probably is to deal with Awesome Jake. Follow him around the map and make sure that Osiris can't be as much of a nuisance as the Renegades want him to be.
There's another blue buff invade from the Knights. Making it over there and dropping that buff before the Renegades could get back in there. But there was a big rotation from Renegades on the backside, so they couldn't stick around or look for any more picks or anything of the like. So Scary D continues battling it out with Solar Troll here in solo. Nothing crazy that's going to come from that fight. So it becomes kind of like you said, have the Knights figured out how they want to try and apply pressure throughout the rest of this early game. I'm looking at Paul's build. I saw him building into some of that flat pen. I was wondering where he was going. It looks like it's a Spear of Desolation for him. This is a bit different than what we normally see, but it prioritizes some cooldown. It's a ton of upfront power as well.
It's definitely, I mean, 110 is kind of hard to overlook. Plus, you're going to be getting that pin, and like you said, the cooldown reduction that comes through. And it's maybe going to allow him to, I would say, snowball into it if you're looking for more kills. That, to me, maybe sings, hey, Cuvo, come to my lane. Like, if you get a kill or assist, you're going to be able to continue the snowball. You can continue the fight. And so Knights wanting to get aggressive. You're not going to have the, imminent anti-heal that we're used to seeing this early on in, like, a Divine Ruin, but it's still going to give you the stats. And admittedly, there's not necessarily anybody on the Renegades I'm worried about healing too much. Maybe Barra once he finishes off his lifesteal item here, but he's still tier 2'd on that, so he doesn't even have that available to him. You're not necessarily worried about those trades. It feels like the kind of gear you pick up when you're looking for a Gold Fury. And even with the way Cuvo's kind of dancing in this area, Knights are trying to find an opening to either force Jake into a bad fight or to find a huge gank on the left lane.
Well, maybe it is Gold Fury time. I mean, even Scary D is on the left side of the map, and Renegades have to know it now. They've chased him over here, and that indeed is the call, but it looks as though Renegades do not recognize it. Either that or they don't think they have a chance to contest the Gold Fury being burnt quickly, and the Knights take it easily. The Renegades didn't have anybody local, and again, they definitely saw Scary D was topside, so here's what's going to be the trade from them. They're going to grab the Pyromancer on the right side in an attempt to answer back.
And what I like, and this didn't showcase it, but the concept, I think, is always going to be there. That trade is easy to do. You don't have to use any ults or any bursts to get that, because they're all on the left-hand side, or they just back. No Knights members should be near this Pyromancer, so you're pretty safe. But the same reason that the Knights were able to melt that Gold Fury is something I think Renegades kind of have the option to go into. I'm looking at Venenu, and again, the options that Morrigan brings into the game, and my eyes fall to that Merlin. I mean, if you're looking to try and sneak a Fire Giant, either of these teams have that capability because of the burn that he has. If you, again, need a secure, you've got the ability to change that Bacchus. It's a slow roll right now from the Renegades, and honestly, the later it goes, maybe the better it is for them. Maybe don't have the exact same kind of tankiness up front that I think the Knights are going to have, but once you have Solar Troll in the fight to be that Guardian for you, once you have Jake with a full build and relatively tanky to stand out in the front lane, it's going to make it a little bit easier for them. Unfortunately, I think that the Ullr is going to make a big difference in those instances, but if Renegades can find a way to control Zapman late on, it's still a really good draft for him, and I think that's just kind of the way they're looking at it now.
Well, there's a big rotation to the left. Speaking of controlling Zatman, this could be it. Lasbra's on his way. He's got Awesome Jake coming in too, but it looks like the Knights are starting to recognize that they take some defensive positioning. Neil stepping further forward, and Renegades aren't going to find anything with this rotation. I think you might have hit the nail on the head when it comes to trying to find some way to control Zap, because he is now ahead of Barracuda. That's no big surprise. They had Uller Bacchus. That's just instant pressure in lane, even with a warrior support. So Zapman's off to a really good start, and now the question sort of becomes, how do the Renegades try and stall out this obvious pressure that the Knights have? You mentioned Venenu being able to turn into all these different targets like the Merlin, but I mean, he can even turn into something like a Bacchus to give them some initiation, or even an Amaterasu. There's a ton of pressure, I think, on Venenu and what he ends up picking in terms of his transformations.
And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bacchus is maybe target number one with Ama almost right behind it. Like, as much as I love the calls that you could potentially make with some of the others, like you pointed out, it's the most important part. The initiation, the ability to jump in and start a fight for your team. Because who's going to do it otherwise? I mean, I guess Awesome Jake can get in there, but you're not necessarily sending your warriors in first all the time. Maybe late game you can afford it, but right now, yeah, especially in the support role, he doesn't necessarily have the farm that you're used to seeing out of a solo laner either. He's level 9 compared to the solos 13 and 14 in this game right now. It's not the same impact. It's not the same itemization. So it's a different pace and a different play style here that Jake's going to have to adopt to translate that into the late game. I'm excited to see what he can do with it, because Osiris support is kind of a novelty in my eyes, but if it doesn't work, then maybe they just try to swing back to the norm next game.
But I think you kind of touched on another important note, which is that the longer that this goes, the less that they're getting Osiris support, and the more they're just getting behind Osiris, right? I mean, all the points when I feel like having this Osiris as your support in particular would have been valuable are starting to have already passed at this point, right? I mean, eventually you're just going to get to the point where he's level 10 instead of level 14. Neil Ma is getting aggressive, and Scary D is here for the wraparound as well. Venenu is his early target, and they have this Morgan locked down, so he has to turn to the Pele just for the escape, and that's already big for the Knights if they force that important cooldown to be used in a defensive manner.
Yeah, longer than your standard ultimate, so Venenu is going to be under duress for a little bit longer. Scary is still zoning him out, and it actually brings into the conversation. You're looking at Awesome Jake, as you pointed out, falling behind, which I think is the brilliant read from Cuvo early on in the Knights as a whole to make that gank and turn the control that started this game in favor of the Renegades. I haven't seen Zapman, or specifically, Barracuda, being able to push past kind of the 50-yard line on the map in the last, I guess, 13 minutes, because the first minute they were up at the Tower 1 or the Tier 1 tower. They haven't been able to get as aggressive as they want in this dual lane. And when you look at the other side, it's a zone from Scary D onto Lasbra. It's anything onto Lasbra. The jungler on the other side, much like they mentioned on the desk, if he gets off to a good game, Lasbra can absolutely change the pace of it, much like we've seen out of like Sam for Soccer. But unfortunately, he doesn't seem to have hit his stride just yet, whether it's kind of comfort just coasting into the late game with the rest of the team, or if it's the fact that he's had a lot stripped away from him from Cuvo. He hasn't really been as present as you would want out of your Susano. No big ganks, no big crazy control shift in favor of the Renegades. I need to see a little more coming down from him to be able to kind of open the door for the rest of the team to step forward into a lead.
And I think Doug highlighted this earlier on, that the Glad Shield was the first pickup for Awesome Jake. So he's delayed what I'm assuming is still going to be a Gauntlet of Thebes for him pretty late into his build. He's still going to need to stack that up if that is what he ends up electing to pick up in that third slot as well. So he's going to be way behind Neil, who already has his evolved and is working on what looks like a Pride Wind behind it. But now there's aggression. Awesome Jake has been knocked up, and remember, he's not nearly as tanky as you would normally expect at this point. So it's aggression from Cubo Fred, but Awesome Jake makes it out, so Scary D comes in to pick up the mantle, but they lose Cubo Fred for its support for jungle. Has to favor Renegades. Now Venenu might be able to hunt down Zatman. Can't find the stun, but does get some good damage, and they force the Knights to retreat.
Again, you get a huge ult from Solo Troll and burn that one down. Lasbra still getting chased out, but at this point, I think it's just Scary D looking for anything and everything that are the scraps remaining from the fight. And I don't know, I like the fact you trade Awesome Jake for Cuvo Fred there. I would argue any day of the week if you're Renegades, because of the fact that, again, at this point, he is bait. Like, he is absolutely hanging at the end of your fishing rod, because he's, like we've pointed out, not worth as much as you're going to get. Even from killing someone like Neil, getting rid of the Bacchus opens up a lot of opportunities. I do think it takes away some control Unfortunately, you got to find that control elsewhere if you lose your solo, or your support, I should say. And I don't think Scary's going to walk out of this one happy, but neither is Lasbra.
No, Scary is still in trouble. Solar Troll gets the credit for it, but while all that was happening, the Gold Fury went down in favor of the Knights. So that is, across the map, still pretty favorable for the Knights, right? Because they end up getting that kill on the last one. They got the kill on Awesome Jake that happened a while ago, and now this second Fury being controlled here as well. And I think a lot of this, we're not quite giving Scary enough credit for how much rotating he's been doing here.
Yeah. He's been all over the map, like more than any solo laner really has a right to. I think that's just reading the scenarios very well. Good calls coming down from the rest of the team. I mean, in some of these instances, it's been teleporting over, I think, for that, that first Gold Fury, or being able to rotate back in. But it's also just been the outright aggression. He was earlier single-handedly zoning out Lasbra. He has single-handedly taken down some of these other members and zoned them out just to make sure they cannot be a part of this fight. And doing what you would expect a solo laner to do, but maybe even to an extra limit, because he's been finding kills on top of him. I mean, 3-2-0 isn't the cleanest of slash lines, but that's still 3 kills that he's been able to pick up throughout this game that have done, immense measures for his team, specifically around the Gold Furies. So now they're, in my eyes, for Renegades, going to need to figure out how to deal with this Amaterasu, because otherwise it's free pickings.
Kivo Fred goes aggressive for purple. There was backup from Lasbra and Barracuda. They both get hit by the Typhoon, but they do manage to find the stun as well. That was Zapman that came in with the axe and guarantees that Lasbra falls. Now that's his 3rd death, and Barra stuck on an island. No ultimate to enable his escape, and Zapman gets a 2nd kill. Not in time for the double, but still 2 in this fight. Now the Knights, with 2 members down the side of Renegades, have free reign over this map. It looks like they're heading towards the Fire Giant pit. I don't know if they want the FG itself, but maybe they'll just stick around here in mid instead. A little bit of lurking, but they are going to head over, I imagine, more towards Pyro than anything.
Yeah. I mean, with Paul here, they should be able to absolutely melt anything. They don't even need Paul to melt it down. He just happens to turn the corner at the very end. Renegades didn't have time to react to that one. And that's the biggest thing I'm seeing right now. It's not that they don't have a jungler and a support on the Renegades, but 3-level deficit coming down in the jungle is definitely starting to be felt. The fact that Lasbra isn't as much of a part of these fights. He's got 3 assists of the 3 kills that the team has, but that's about all that it's been written out to. Awesome Jake actually has a level lead. He's been farming a little bit better over there than Neil, but as we pointed out earlier, that Beans is just now starting to stack. He's not going to be as tanky. And with the Jormungandr there, it's not necessarily a trade-off that it would be if maybe it was a Sobek over there, if they had gone like a Ymir solo, where you still have some sort of setup in your team elsewhere that is going to be that big guardian kind of player for your team. It's, okay, now we just have 2 solo laners that evidently late game can sit on the back line and potentially choose someone to not play the game, but if you're so far behind, I mean, level 13, is he going to try to fight the level 19 Zapman? No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody is going to be able to deal with this Uller, and that's the biggest thing. He just hit 20, and Bear's at level 15. Like, the experience gain in the Knights, the way they've been playing the map and the experience, is just leagues ahead of Renegades right now. It's going to be difficult to play catch-up.
Well, Awesome Jake is trying to be the front line for them. Venenu is stealthed as well, but they can't catch anyone on the Knights off guard. And it's disappointing, I think, the way this early game has went for the Knights. You mentioned it, that gank from Cuba Forever, they get that kill into Awesome Jake. I wonder how big of a difference maker that made, because what it has looked like is that this Osiris support really hasn't done anything. That's what it's looked like to me. But I wonder if that's just because it never got to bully in lane the way that it wanted to up against Zap, or maybe rotate over and potentially catch out this Merlin. Instead, it just kind of had to meander in this weird middle ground instead. I don't want to, beat up on Jake, because he's had a great season, I think, up until now, but I just have not yet seen in this game really what the Osiris is meant to do.
And realistically, it's like, if you watch the first 30 seconds where we were just only talking about duo lane, that's where we see what Osiris was capable of, where they're pushing Zapman and Neil under the tier 1 tower. They're out-farming them. They're controlling everything.
This is aggressive positioning by the Knights again on the left-hand side. Fury is spawning in 30, so maybe they're laying a bit of the groundwork to try and grab this next spawn of the Gold Fury once it comes up by pushing them out and controlling some space. But now that we're seeing the back out from Zapman, with 20 seconds, he can still make it back over here. Scary D is not nearby either, so it doesn't necessarily guarantee that that's what they want, but Renegades aren't really in position for it either. They've got 4 members on the left-hand side too, so now that Paul's backing, maybe we won't be seeing a big Fury fight or anything like that happen.
Well, it's interesting because the Knights have had much more, I would say, solid control around that area right prior to a fight. And I think if maybe they get a kill in some of that aggression, we see this Fury burnt down, then everyone backs. But I think the fact that they didn't have a solid grip like they did earlier, they're playing safe in an aggressive way, right? It's how do we make sure we can stay in control without giving a single option for the Renegades to get back into this game. Osiris can jump in, Solar Troll can jump in to try and steal away an objective, no problem. But if there's no way to get in to steal the objective because no one's doing it, you don't have any options to open it up. You're not tanky enough to try and help your team solo it, so you can get caught out pretty easily, much like Jake is right now. I mean, level 14, he's getting shredded faster than anything.
We were worried about the Thebes earlier on, but it is now stacked and ready to go for Awesome Jake just in time as the fight kicking off in the jungle. Solar Troll is the early target of it, but he brushes off much of the damage. In fact, the Knights took a bit more than they bargained for, so they're on the disengage, but Lasper's made his way in. A big Typhoon, but he's the one that gets blown up. Now Venenu is here playing the part of the Pele, looking for damage, but Cuvo Freds is that much better. He gets a double kill. Solar Troll does make it up to the sky and should be able to disengage, but they've already lost the entirety of their backline.
And, I mean, I was looking at the map. Zap is incredibly low, but he managed to get out of it. Scary D.
He doesn't
still
get it.
in there. Oh, no. Finch, it's all falling apart.
It's Scary D who ends up finding that last kill, loops around, finds SOT. Paul catches up to Jake in the jungle, so it ends up being a full-on deicide, and you've already spent plenty of time talking about Merlin's objective burn damage. So now, even without Neil Ma here, perhaps they can feel comfortable trying to start up this FG. They just need for Scary D to be the tank for it, and then Zapman and Paul can provide plenty of burn. Look how quickly it's going down.
Yeah. I mean, they are, again, ahead in experience, 4 levels, 3 levels where you need it in the jungle and in the carry role there. So Zapman having a pretty confident lead. And my eyes, I was looking until Solar Troll died at how deep Awesome Jake was going to try and get the kill onto Zapman. It's an absolutely worthwhile kill if he can find it. But Zap was able to outrun him back, watch the death come, and then rotate in for that Fire Giant push. So it works out really well, and now the Knights, I mean, that tier 1 in mid, it was just a stiff breeze away from death. The same thing can be said for all of these tier 2s. I don't know where the Renegades are going to be able to find their grip. More than likely, we'll see a fight under like the left side Phoenix or maybe mid Phoenix where the Renegades can try to make a hold, but I mean, you've got to deal with Zapman and the damage output he has. You have to deal with Cuvo, who went huge in that last fight. There's just too many high-priority targets right now on the Knights. They've done a great job of diversifying themselves. And even if you're able to get rid of the jungle, or let's say the carry down there and give Zapman his first death, Scary D's 5, 2, and 3. He's been doing a lot, even though he's just been rotating. He's been in the right place at the right time, and it's paid off so much for this Ama.
It's been a great game from Scary D. I mean, I mentioned it the last time that I was casting one of these night sets, is that internally, that SK team really felt like it was Scary whose gameplay elevated enough for them to be able to make that big Worlds run. And, you know, obviously a lot of us thought that it was Neil or that it was Sam, but I think a lot of attention should be paid to formerly Belair, now back again to this Scary D, and a lot of what he's been able to do is now he pressures Venenu. The tier 2 tower and left already dropped, and that was enough to get Venenu to use the Changeling ultimate. I think he turned into the Amaterasu, so that ultimate's on cooldown, and now the Knights don't even have to worry. The left side Phoenix already being threatened. They may have lost Neil Ma, but they got what they came for. Now they have to make sure they can find the disengage, even with SOT here. The Frenzy popped as well. They definitely are happy taking this little skirmish. So Cubo Fred dies into the backline. A double kills Venenu and SOT go down. Too much damage for Barracuda, who gets onto the horse, but Zetman doesn't miss. The bladed arrow cuts him down, and now they're threatening the Titan. This just might be the game, Gore.
I mean, it's not looking really good. Awesome Jake's the only one left standing to try and defend, and well, we've touched on it a few times, but I don't know if he has everything in his kit to be able to do so. So the Knights being able to walk away, and you know, Finch, it feels right. I guess it feels good to be right about the location of the fight, but I was thinking there'd be a little more of a defense from the Renegades. They were able to get Neil, but I mean, it was specifically the fact, and you called it out perfectly, Vin used that ult, Vin had to back, and then we're watching an Amaterasu from the Renegades run and ult towards the left Phoenix instead of being able to get anything done. It just, that ult being used so early left them wide open under that Phoenix siege.
They didn't really get a chance to do much of anything in that 25 minutes it took for the game to end there for the Renegades. Certainly disappointing, I think they'd say, but a really strong game for the Knights, who seem to be back on top of the horse. Let's get it over to Dolson and Mifflin to break it down on the desk.
Well, it's another game, and it's another 25-minute end, and it's another Dolson chair promo at the top of the analysis for game number 1. And I once again am going to ask you to consider Maxonomic, $50 off using code SmiteMax. The chairs are comfortable. Gormazer would know. He used to cast Hand of the Gods for hours in these things. And hey, if you buy a bunch of them, I won't bother you about buying them any further on SmiteMax, needforseatusa.com. That's Maxonomic, the chair sponsor for the Smite Pro League. Mifflin with me to talk about game number 1. And Mifflin, this is a game that starts off somewhat slow, but starts to really cascade into fireworks towards the end of this game. A small lead turned big, and the Knights roll over the Renegades.
And that's what's going to happen, especially considering Renegade's comp there. Let's take a peek at it. Jormungandr, Susano, Morgan, Osiris, Hachiman. What does that say to you? It's all dive. They don't have any peel. They don't have any way to deflect a siege. Renegade's comp was, let's pick this, and we need to win, and we need to continue to win. Once they get to that Phoenix defense, Gore pointed out they expected more from the Renegades to really deflect that push. What do they have? Ven's not playing a standard mage that can keep the waves out. He doesn't have any AoE. Jake's playing Osiris, so there's really no lockdown coming out of your support. There's no way for them to stop unbridled aggression from the Knights.
Yep.
And the second the Knights get their lead, they identify that properly and just continue pushing advantageous fights.
And the rotations from the solo laners this game really paying off. SOT kind of the most attractive KDA, I would say, on the Renegades, but Scary D as well on this Amaterasu. You saw the respect that the Renegades were forced to pay Scary D by the end of that game, forcing Venenu back, forcing Relics just by kind of stepping forward in some of these engagements. Now I kind of have to go back to what maybe didn't work here for the Renegades, and we've talked a bit about what worked for the Knights. I think this was an uncharacteristic game for Lasbra. In one sense, he didn't get any kills. In the other sense, he was close to top deaths on his team, and that's not what we've come to expect, I don't think, from Lasbra.
No, Lasbra's consistency was put to the test this match, partially due to the fact that Cuvo just had a fantastic game. Lasbra, in the early, was farming up. He was trying to get ready to start his own ganking path, but instead, Cuvo immediately rotates into long lane, finds the kill, gets a level lead, rotates back into his own jungle, finds some more kills in mid, and Lasbra had to force some fights that maybe he wouldn't have otherwise just to keep his team afloat. Unfortunately, he just got completely outpaced by the Pele.
Yeah, sometimes all it takes is the enemy jungler just having a wild game to kind of put you behind, and maybe that's what happens to Lasbra here. There's something about Pele in this water today where the jungler playing Pele kind of just goes off. And I'm curious now, Mifflin, if, a jungler yourself, you start to see maybe a shift in this jungle meta. We've seen a lot of Hunbat spans, gods of that metric. Do you imagine now that we're starting to see a lot of variety in the jungle, there's maybe a fade away from Hunbats or over priority on other jungle gods and maybe shift it up? Or is there just too much that's viable in the jungle right now?
Going off of this week exclusively, there's been a consistent thread in the change of god pool in junglers, and it's leaning towards that early game damage. We're seeing Thanatos, we're seeing Pele, we're seeing Susano. These are gods that can get involved very early on and then continually push their pressure into the late because they're all pretty decent in the late game, barring maybe Thanatos, but have we seen it piloted recently with the new builds and new items coming online in Season 7? He's not falling off. It's this pure 1v1 potential that we're seeing out of these junglers, which is kind of reminiscent of what's been going on in the meta. We see a lot of these games start to stagnate around that dance around the Fire Giant at that 25 to 30 minute mark, and that's when the jungler can look for the 1v1 potential. Maybe that's why we're seeing that reflected in the picks.
And that's kind of how this game was for a while. I sort of brought up it was a slow start, fireworky towards the end, but you're looking 15 minutes into this game, only a handful of kills on the board until finally some big, flashy team fights start to break out, and it was the Knights who came out ahead. Xingqian continues to be high priority here for the Knights or for the Renegades, with Hell taking a ban slot up as well. What about that Xingqian maybe screams first ban worthy to you?
It's really just they're looking at Jake and they say, well, what's Jake comfortable on? Jing Shen and Horus. let's get rid of him. Let's see what he can do outside of it. And going off of last game, Jake went to Osiris.
Yeah.
Completely unorthodox warrior support. That's some of that 408 ranked experience that you come to expect. And it's not working at this top level. I think if you target out one guy and he's not going to have anything reliable to lean back towards, why not just go ahead and do it? PK showing that it's going to work for him.
Maybe I'm misremembering, but I feel like I remember Jake doing pretty well on a Hercules or something earlier this split. Could be a misremember because we have started to see a lot of Hercules here recently. Horus, though, banned out, so awesome. Jake taking 2 of the 3 bans, maybe 3 out of the 3, with Odin taking a ban as well for the Knights. Let's make him as uncomfortable as possible. This is an interesting spot for the Renegades. You look at some of those high-priority gods that are still available between Camazotz, Thor, Morgan now available. Didn't have a great showing in our previous game. Renegades need to think carefully here about what they want to give over to the Knights. And it's going to be the Ullr ban, maybe leaving some of that priority open for themselves on the second wave of picks.
I like the Ullr ban. Last game really started going downhill for Renegades once they rotated into the long. Zapman finds his first 2 kills in the match, and from there it was just constant aggression from this Ullr, jumping in, finding axe stunts, getting bladed arrow. But if you're going to target out Hell and Ullr, Zapman and Paul, you're leaving Camazotz open. This is still an incredibly strong god, despite some recent meta adjustments, some nerfs, if you would, on his power through the one. He's still going to have that sustain, that mobility, that true damage. If it goes towards Soul Lane, he's going to be a constant source of aggression. If he goes into the jungle, his gank potential is incredibly high.
Now, interesting here, Mifflin, in that the Renegades are going to go back to Morrigan, and it's only the second time we've seen her now in the SPL and back to that Hachiman. Are you at all surprised now with the way Game 1 ends up that they want to go back to their same first 2 picks from game number 1?
These 2 picks are both incredibly strong. Morgan more so as a late game hyper carry. Hachiman because he brings that safety in the early game. He doesn't get dove quite as easily. I would imagine we see some more shifts towards these peripheral picks, something that can protect this Morgan in the early game, make sure she's not as costed as much as she did last match. Maybe a more Guardian-focused support. Geb could come through, make sure she gets out alive very well. In the late game, Morgan doesn't really need a team around her. She plays as another assassin. She's looking for that burst. She has the stealth to get in behind people. But in the early game, you have to keep her alive. You have to babysit a little bit because she is still a mage.
Remember, Bacchus and Merlin worked quite well for the Knights in game number 1, so similar to the Renegades, similar draft for the Knights. Both the Camazotz locked in, and maybe call that a net upgrade. Fafnir, a god we've only seen once or twice so far in the SPL, and maybe that's the pick that the Renegades choose for Awesome Jake.
With Fafnir, if Morgan decides to turn into another hunter, they could use the Coerce to instantly blow up an objective, but PK has that objective burn as well now that they picked up this Merlin. I think it's worth pointing out this Bacchus pickup, again, incredibly strong into Morgan. Her only escape tool being a stealth means if Bacchus lands the flop, if he channels the burp, there's no way Morgan's going to get away. She's instantly going to be revealed. Most likely she's going to be stunned. She's going to see a lot of aggression towards her again.
And worth noting around that Fafnir, Mifflin, that the Knights did ban out Fafnir in game 1. It was the Odin that took that Fafnir ban slot for the Knights here in game number 2. So it's obviously something that the Knights are aware maybe that 408 wants to play here for the Renegades. And similar vibe with the second wave of bans for the Renegades. They're going to take away Pele, take away Thor, similar to what they did in the first game. And Hunbat's King Arthur taken away as well. So now we're going to have to see a little bit of that jungle flexibility that maybe we were talking about. What maybe jumps out to you is what would still be priority here.
We still got Thanatos in the wings, and we know that god has global pressure and damage on damage. One team more than likely going to pick it up. I'm more interested in that both teams elect to ban out junglers when neither one really has one. PK could elect to shift their focus and just go ahead and pick up that Camazotz in the jungle, as you just pointed out. Surtcat coming out for Renegades, it's a good pickup, especially into Merlin. He's going to have a very hard time, but there is a slight counter matchup there. If Merlin drops flames on his feet, Surtcat's going to have to just sit on his head inside his own flames. Depends on when you get that combo online. I think this Camazotz might actually go into the jungle.
Yeah, I wouldn't be super surprised here at this point. With King Arthur being banned out, maybe the Knights are starting to set themselves up for a solo lane Camazotz, trying to take away something that might work well. And maybe the Susano hover leans into that. Kernanos is certainly a hunter that we have seen few and far between at this point, maybe only once or twice on his pick count here as well. But I think getting Cubo onto something like the Susano certainly would work, and I like the place that the Knights are here in this draft, where they have the flexibility to maybe force the Renegades to consider what way they're going, and now that maybe shows us that it's going to be Scary D on the Camazotz in the solo lane.
This comp from PK still has so much dive potential. A little bit less so out of the Hunter. Cernunnos a little bit less aggressive than we saw last match. But Camazotz is going to have a very easy time keeping Morgan locked down. That Dot's going to keep her out of her stealth. Bacchus Jump's going to be able to lock down just about anybody. If Renegades wants to see success in the early game, it's going to be completely contingent on this Serket. Whether or not she can shut someone down early and keep the Morgan afloat, that's going to be the big question mark going forward. If this Morgan makes it into the late game relatively unscathed, the Renegades have a very good chance of just snowballing and having her instantly blow up these squishy targets on PK.
Talk about a low pick rate game here for gods. Agni, Morgan, Kernanos, Bacchus here and there, Fafnir. Teams are starting to roll the dice on some interesting picks here, Mifflin. Who do you like on either side?
Both these comps are interesting, but I have to give the slight edge to PK. Their comp has a little bit more cohesion in my mind. This Morgan going into the long lane is going to be especially difficult. I imagine it's not going to be Agni over there. Now she's going to have to contend with Bacchus from minute 1 instead of waiting for that 3v3 in mid.
Well, Pittsburgh Knights take game 1 in about 25 minutes. Can they follow up in game 2? Finch and Gormizer will tell us.
Well, they got Hachiman and Agni. I mean, so the Morgan's got to go somewhere in that regard, too, right? Yeah. They've already got the Serket, so I can only think solo lane is what's left, and that is the case. It's SOT piloting this Morgan in the short lane here, Gormizer, with Hachiman, ADC, and Venenu taking the Agni mid. And we saw last time that the Morgan was trying to bide her time, but was under too much pressure to have any good changeling ultimates. Do you see things going better for SOT in solo up against Camazotz?
Well, I don't know that it's going to go better necessarily in the sense that he's going to be able to walk out and have a much cleaner game, but I think safer and more farm for this Morgan is going to be a lot more potent, right? It's going to be readily available, and that's kind of what I expect to see is over there just kind of cleanly picking up wave after wave, gold after gold, XP after XP, until you can feel those late game rotations. That being said, we've seen a lot of rotations early to solo, and it doesn't look good here.
It could potentially be bad. Cubo Fred does have the blink. SOT said in that interview when you talked to him, Gore, that he was ready for a potentially early game gank happening on him, but I don't know if he was ready for double assassins in his lane playing a mage. That first blood for the Knights happening, and SOT really never stood a chance there. He's got blink as his first relic.
Yeah, it's going to take him a little while. He's going to walk the long way all over back to this lane, which means Totem of Ku. Like, smaller things that you wouldn't normally expect happening over here are going to happen. He misses the last half of that wave. Totem of Ku is free. Things like that will make a big difference if they happen consistently. Luckily, it's only going to be a little bit, but he's still not back in lane, so he's going to be losing a little bit more XP and things like that. This is really good if you're Camazotz, right? I mean, you're getting ahead, you have complete control of your lane, you are more than happy for something like that to happen. You get Cubo, another early game kill, which gives him a little bit of XP, just twist over Lasbra. And unfortunately, it feels like this duo lane, I mean, you get Bacchus plus anybody, and it's going to be very aggressive. The Knights are doing a very similar style to what they were doing last time, except now they're putting the hard carry ahead, and in my eyes, that's going to be Scary D, especially based on what we saw last game.
He had a great game on the Amaterasu, and he's set up for another great game now on this Camazotz after that excellent early start. And look at this rotation from Cubo. They're here to put pressure on this jungle for the Renegades on this side of the map where they know that their weakness. I wonder if it's even a speed buff invade. That's certainly where the fellas are hanging, and Lasbra's on his way to that. I don't think he's ready for there to suddenly be two people on his buff. There won't even be a fight. They got there so quickly that the speed buff invade is just done.
He might have seen them, and it looks like he did as they went to leave. So the blue buff, there might be time for a rotation.
That's theirs too.
Yeah, I was going to say, it looks like they're just going to leave it. A couple of pings coming out. I mean, Solar Troll, you've already been melted by 2 assassins once. Maybe you don't want to rotate into that. Lasbra kind of in the same boat. You don't necessarily want to try and jump into that. And I'm trying to look at the bright side for the Renegades, and honestly, my eyes fall once again back towards Awesome Jake. And it's in moments like that. It's where that hammer stun can come through and how much that can cancel on the side of the Knights. It's the belch that comes down from the Bacchus. All of a sudden, that stun's not going to be there. Being able to lock down Scary D later on in the game is going to be helpful, or stop Paul from channeling some of those just immense damaging fire abilities, specifically the 3 and Fire Stance that helps shred everybody down. There's a lot of open potency on the Renegades. It has to come into realization, right? And as of right now, the farm game still coming up blue. The Knights just seem to have kind of a grip on the rotations they know they want to make, and it's just causing so much trouble for Lasbra more than anyone.
It is causing troubles for Lazar, but it's affecting the whole map, truly. I mean, Zapman and Neil have had pressure here and left. You saw Neil lurking around in the jungle earlier on the top side, on the Chaos side of the map. Obviously, the Cubo Fred, Scary D, Convoy looked good, but this could be trouble in left with Lasbra and Venenu here, but they elect not to pull the trigger. You saw those pings. I think they know they missed out on that speed, and they want to make sure they're there for it this time. If they show their face in left, they'll almost certainly lose that jungle again, so they're heading back to defend.
And all of that, there's just a small ward, just off of that vision shard that happened to be placed that they saw the Agni coming over. Venenu was standing pretty much directly on it while they were making that rotation, and so they're like, you know what, if mid's over here, no one's seen Lasbra for a little while, scratch your chin a little bit, you can put 2 and 2 together. I like the fact that they play it safe on the Knights, and it's just the way the vision works, why wards are so important in the game. And a gank right there that gets a kill potentially for Lasbra changes this game and gets Renegades back in it. Right now, Lasbra is in the same position he was last time. Where is he going to fight, and how is he going to get aggressive?
They're too late to this, though. The blue buff gets invaded yet again, Gord. Cubo Fred has to disengage as Awesome Jake goes to the Draconic Corruption. It's just too late. They'll happily use Scary D's ultimate to disengage safely. They didn't get the speed buff again, but that's not so bad. I mean, the speed buff invade should almost never happen. They're so rare. So they'll continue to pressure this blue, continue to put pressure on Solar Troll, and deny him farm in every opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that they've got 2 speed buff invades in 2 games is pretty impressive. And being as consistent as they are, the goal last game we kept highlighting was try to shut down Morrigan. They didn't have to shut down Venenu because they shut down the side lane so hard that the pressure kind of just surmounted itself in the mid lane, right? They didn't have to gank him a lot because what was he going to do? Outclear the Merlin? That's not going to happen very easily. As you can see, Paul kind of dealing with it just fine this game as well. And so now, hey, Morgan's over in a place where it's pretty easy to get some consistent farm. Let's shut it down as best as possible. That blue buff, it's ours now. The XP camps that usually go to the jungle anyway, they're going to be ours now if we can get over there. And your life, if you're Solar Troll, is going to Scary D or Cubo Fred if you don't play cautiously enough. And unfortunately for him, he's got that blink. He wanted to be aggressive. They want to win this fight because the best way to deal with Camazotz is to shut him down early as well, but it's been going the opposite way for the Renegades.
Now some aggression. Lasbra doesn't find anything with the Cobra's Kiss. Lasbra should throw him back into the CC chain, but Scary D is just not taking enough damage to where he has to be worried. He doesn't have Bat out of Hell, but he's still getting aggressive. Cubo Fred brings a straggler with him in Venenu, so they got to be careful. Awesome Jake is here too. Renegades now starting to rotate a lot of people over here to solo. They're recognizing that they're losing a lot of farm. They're hemorrhaging it over here on the solo side, so they're rotating numbers over to try and alleviate some of that pressure.
Well, Scary D did just give us a very good masterclass in everything that's going on. Although Cubo, I'm kind of curious as to dive into my soapbox before I see what happens with this jungler. They're still looking for aggression here on the Knights, and it's going to be a blue buff invade.
I like this. Cubo Fred considered going for speed, saw that opportunity wasn't there, so just comes back to blue. That's been consistently there for him all along. It's like maybe the nerdy friend at the beginning of the movie that you don't realize they've been by your side that whole time. And that's been this blue buff, so Cubo Fred comes right back to it, steals it again, and that's really just made life miserable for SOT and for Lasbra. They're both missing out on farm.
Well, and the biggest thing, again, you're trying to deal with it. It looks like there's some pressure from both teams coming onto the solo lane. They force a blink out once again from Solar Troll. But Scary D gave us a masterclass in why Camazotz is so good. And it's just the survivability, the sustain that he brings in, the fact that a 2-man gank onto him with a Morgan and a Serket resulted in him pushing them back under the tower is huge over there. Of course, there was a little bit of help. Cubo rotated in. But it's the pressure that they have immediately in solo lane. lane, immediately in the jungle right now. That's transitioning into pressure elsewhere. I mean, they haven't needed to look at duo lane because Neil and Zap are in such control over here, and it's not the same massive lead it was last time, but I mean, Bera and Jake can't get aggressive. They can't fight into this. They're waiting for that late game. And even if they are able to maybe jump in and cause a little bit of disruption, no big ganks are available on the left-hand side because of the vision.
It's just a great adaptation from the Knights in general, right? Because they know for sure that because it's this mage in the short lane that Scary D and Cubo Fred went on the right side of the map. So Neilma's not rotating over, and that's making life harder on Awesome Jake as well, right? Because he wants to rotate over to try and help them out, to try and prevent them from losing buffs. But when they do, then you see Neilma step up onto the duo side jungle and start threatening red buff and purple, or potentially threatening Barracuda's life. And this is why I don't think you see mages picked in solo that often. This early game deficit has hamstrung the entirety of the map for the Renegades.
Yeah, it's made it a lot easier to know where to put the pressure on. In fact, Scary D doesn't even need the help. He forces the ult. And honestly, Solar Troll's just going, who's got the most mobility? How can I run away here? But it's still too much.
Even with the Changeling ultimate, Scary D finds that solo kill, but it's a question of can he escape? He's committed all of his resources. That was so good that Lasbra got him back underneath the tier 2, so they'll at least shut him down. That's a big bonus, but now can they get for the blue buff? This is great work from Awesome Jake inside the Draconic Corruption. He's even brought Cubo Fred down low, so Venenu dashes in, finds the stun before Neilma can flop back out, but Lasbra keeps going, hunts down Cubo Fred. Venenu blows up Neilma, and finally this aggression from the Knights gets answered.
It's just so clean. That is what happens when you bite off more than you can chew. That is a very good visual representation of the words as well. You're going too deep, diving past the tier 1 into a tier 2 to get those kills. In the middle of the fight, you're like, cool, maybe we can get the blue buff as well. There were just too many targets on the Knights' mind. They didn't have a single fight in their head. And because of that, the Renegades are able to just pick them apart as they need to. And it keeps them more or less alive in the game. It's still a gold deficit, and there's still a pretty big chunk of experience deficit. But Lasbra gets 2 kills. Now he has a level lead in the jungle, and now he can start playing the game that we've wanted to see since the first minute of the first game. Unfortunately, he hasn't been able to show up. The desk mentioned that it didn't look kind of, normal for Lasbra to have a game like that. And this is the opening, I think, for this Serket to start to shine a lot brighter than everything around it. Also, I will give shout-outs to Venenu, because those meteors being where they were when they were a huge help for the team. And again, trying to close that gap between the Agni and the Merlin is maybe just as important as getting Lasbra ahead.
It is, and Lasbra found the key punish that made sure that Scary D ended up dying. But to me, that's not even the big highlight. For me, it's Awesome Jake's work there, as Lasbra does catch Zapman near the Gold Fury. Paul is in some trouble here too, as he can get collapsed on by 3 members. Lasbra does good work with the last breath to force Paul to retreat, but Zapman shows up. The Wild Hunt claims the life of Lasbra, and just as we were singing his praises, he ends up taking a spill. But what was so important was that Awesome Jake got all that damage onto 2 people, onto Cubo Fred and Neilma, when they were over there by the blue buff, a 2-man stun, breathing on both of them with those basic attacks in the dragon form. I think it's good work from Jake. I think it's also a little bit of bad work from the Knights, kind of clumping up there and letting Jake get all that additional value. So it was just good work from really the entirety of the Renegades on that right-hand side.
Playing it very well, and I think recognizing where ults go, where anti-heal is being pushed out, specifically, again, Lasbra's ult being able to deal with Camazotz is huge, and locking them down is going to be able to open it up. There's not as many targets on the other side. Yeah, you've got some anti-heal built into your kit on the Knights that you really need to lock down, but I think Lasbra can have a heyday if he gets the right targets when they're looking for these engagements.
Gold Fury being started up by the Knights. They already got aggressive up top and forced out most members of Renegade, so they know that this Gold Fury is essentially free from them. And so I know that they got that answer back from the Renegades and right, but the Knights still get a lot of the stuff they wanted. They still have Solar Troll largely relegated out of the game on this Morrigan pick. They still have Paul ahead on this Merlin in terms of where Venenu is on the map too. So even though there was a little bit of answer back from the Renegades, I don't think the Knights are pressed about that at all. They still have the 4,000 gold lead or very near that, and they have their leads in the spots of the map where they wanted.
Yeah, that's where it comes down. The gold has not dissipated at all for the Knights. So even though they've been losing some of these kills and maybe losing some of the skirmishes, objective control, I think, is still pretty much the name of the game, right? Anything that gets you closer to killing the Titan is better. there's a tier 1 in solo that's already gone versus, Scary D's, which is kind of barely scratched when you look at it. The Fury going their way as easily as it did. Last game, that was at least responded to with a Pyromancer. This time, there's no chance for the Renegades to really open that door. So a lot kind of getting shut down in their face, more or less. And it's all on the back of maybe Lasber dying a little early there. The engagements are going to be very difficult. And normally you have a second tank to kind of come in, right? If Awesome Jake maybe gets zoned out, Solar Troll is able to make the rotations we've seen Scary D making, or at least what we saw him make last game and started to make this game. But you don't get that as much with the Morgan unless he goes into his ult early on, and unless they're willing to commit it and they guarantee that he's going to be, utilizing it for good. I don't think we're going to see too much out of this Morgan. I feel like it's just going to slowly fade, not necessarily out of existence, but I don't know where it's going to pop the same way that we're going to see Scary D.
Yeah, he's kind of losing half the value. He's still going to have good transformations, obviously, and they'll be up more often, but he is going to lose a lot of that base Morgan value that can be so strong. It's a potential red buff invader for the Knights as Neomog gets aggressive. Scary D is here as well. The red buff does drop in favor of the Order side team. They don't find much else there. A stun from Venenu sets up some good poke onto Cubo, but the Knights, yet again, have gotten what they wanted and left.
And while Scary D is still technically in a position, actually low on mana, this might be a kill.
It might be. Big Typhoon ends up coming through as well, and Lasber gets the kill onto Scary D, but Neomog still wants some fighting on the back end. They lock down SOT inside all that Merlin damage from Paul, and he can't make it out. What about Awesome Jake? He still has Draconic Corruption, and he's stuck in between a couple members, but he's plenty tanky. I wonder if Awesome Jake just does not like Gauntlet of Thieves. He went Glad Shield over it last time. This time it's the Sovereignty into the Spellbound Kusari. Venenu avoids the aggression there from Neomog, but Cubo Fred is lurking behind the tier 1, blinks in, and Awesome Jake's become the target. There's the ultimate coming out that should buy him some time, but Cubo Fred target swaps over to Venenu. Can't get him either. Neomog continues to step forward even though he's low, and Renegades make it out without losing any extra lives.
Well, and I love this because Zap keeps the pressure going on the tower. They need it to be able to trade out with Bara, but it's also in a position to let Cubo run free in the jungle. Where are you going to go? You're going to try to contend over the speed buff? It's not looking good, but Cubo may be biting off more than he can chew because Vin's going to rotate over, and he still gets the kill.
He gets the kill. SOT finally is able to blink in and punish Cubo Fred for it, since he did just make his way through on that top side of the fight to end up helping out, but still, we're seeing that the Knights are the ones that are largely the aggressors in every single one of these fights. They have plateaued a bit in terms of that golden experience lead, but this is going to help out with it when they add the Pyromancer onto their list of accolades. And they're even going to start up the Fire Giant. This is how little they're worried about the Renegades coming in and expecting this. Solar Troll is nearby. How does he not notice that any of this is going on? He's just chilling on the blue buff. He's got to come in and do something about this. Now he's starting to make his presence known, but he just goes to lane. They don't want to contest the FG at all.
Now the question has to come down to, did they not notice it, or did they make the call to not go in on it?
SOT should have noticed.
Might be able. Yeah, I was going to say, you could hear it, you could see it walking back to lane. You might lose Scary D in the process, although Kamazov's showing his survivability once again. This is a good rotation from the Knights.
That's good sustaining. Neomog comes in to provide the support, and even if he dies here, that's good. You much rather have Solar or Troll live than Neomog in that scenario, so he does that key bit of peel that gets a Scary D out of there, even though it does end up costing Neomog his life. But again, I'm wondering, man, with SOT there, maybe he didn't want to step in. Maybe he couldn't have seen it or heard it from that blue buff. It is a bit close or a bit far. It's just right on that line of if you can notice it or not. So it's tough to say. He didn't go to it at all, though, which makes me think that he certainly didn't know or didn't want anything to do with it.
Well, I mean, especially with the positioning of the rest of the Renegades, most of them on the left side of the map, I'm not going in if I'm the lone Morgan. I'm not going to try. It's just a key to death at that point if you misplay it. So whether or not he noticed it, I like him not going in there because the low chance of a steal, even with stealth, isn't going to be enough for you. And fortunately, this time, though, Scary D, it's just too deep.
Yeah, he still didn't have an ult to get back out of there, so Solar or Troll gets an easy kill there on him. I wonder how he ended up getting that far back. His TP's on cooldown. Maybe that was it, as Cubo Fred finds the kill on to Solar or Troll. Renegades were kind of the aggressors, though. They had grouped up around the Fury. They wanted it in trade for the FG they'd given up, but they still can't do it. Not with Neomog, Paul, and Zetman all lurking nearby. So Renegades end up dropping the actual Fury itself. But this is all the Knights this time that they were supposed to be operating with the FG, and they really haven't gotten a whole lot out of it. So even though the Renegades maybe ended up giving up some kills there, they've done good to stall out the Knights' aggression.
Yeah, nothing big for the Knights. What kind of equates to nothing big for the Renegades either. I think being able to stall it out is a huge win, though. The only people left with a Fire Giant buff are Paul and Zapman, which having it on the carry is still a huge deal and definitely something that your towers should be scared of. But there's not really a position right now for the Knights to be able to break forward. They have a minute and a half to try and do something with this. But I don't know if they're going to be able to, at least not immediately. Fury pressure is still something they could look for. Zapman, actually, with Fire Giant and a full Devo's Gauntlets, could potentially go over to solo it, especially as someone like Hernanos with built-in lifesteal or built-in damage amp, either way, depending on the season you want to be in. So there's some open opportunities for the Knights to still at least use some advantage from the Fire Giant and force the Renegades into an awkward spot. They just have to win the fight around it, which so far it's kind of been a hit or miss as to whether or not they have the full control.
They do have full control of this Primal Fury. Yet again, Renegades not going to show up to the party. And just look at, our trackers up there for all the objectives. The one Fire Giant this game belongs to the Knights. The only 2 Furies belong to the Knights. Totem of Coup control has been largely the Knights, 6-2 now, since Morrigan's the only one that's left over there. And that's what's been a big difference maker here. Sure, the Renegades have fought back in terms of those kills. They're leading 7-6 there now. But the Knights established pressure in solo, constantly stripped away that solo side of the map in terms of that jungle farm. And now they're objective focused. Now they're pushing down the tier 1. They already got the tier 1 in mid and in solo. They're even going to threaten this tier 2 tower. The Renegades are finally here to show a little bit of defense for it, but Zapman's putting in good damage, and Awesome Jake is not tanky enough to frontline. He's already well below half, down to a quarter, and this tier 2 should go down.
I mean, Zap's got what he needs to deal with either a tower or an Awesome Jake, whichever one happens to be standing in front of him while he throws out his autos. And it is the Executioner plus a Fire Giant buff. He doesn't quite have the pin I think you would like him to at this point in the game. It's more than likely going to be something that he can stack on a little bit later, depending on how he wants to go with this Rage. But, I mean, you're not looking at him as like the imminent, killer, I guess, of Awesome Jake specifically. Maybe Solar Troll now that he's been able to finish a couple of tanky items. But when he has Fire Giant buff, he doesn't care whether or not he has pin, because the Fire Giant's going to help assist him in that. A big tier 2 swing over there in left lane for them. A lot of control where the Knights want it the most, as far away from the Fire Giant as possible, especially with the timer on it being about 30 seconds away. That opens up the availability for the Knights to take control of the pit one more time. Maybe not as cleanly as they did last time. I expect some fight from the Renegades around the next couple of objectives, but I mean, considering the Pyromancer, the Fire Giant, and that last Fury all went away without Renegades even being able to fight it that much, you're maybe looking at, at least one more in the Pyromancer going down before they can really retaliate.
This Pyromancer's up, Fire Giant will be right behind it, so the Knights start that Pyro up. And again, no contest from the Renegades. Fire Giant now up. And if I'm the Knights, yet again, do I try and put a tough question to the Renegades, which is, can you deal with us starting up this Fire Giant? The Renegades are nearby. They've got just about everyone on this side of the map. They've got all their relics at their disposal as well. So eventually the Renegades have to take a fight, or they'll just keep being worse fights as the game goes on, because they haven't contested, and this might be the one they'll take.
I think the question is going to be, can you force Awesome Jake to use his ult and get rid of that immunity? Even if you don't get the kill, you have an open opportunity to then kill him later on in the game, or he loses his ability to try and jump in on the Fire Giant, or you can just pressure him into a fight on the side and separate him. I mean, this is a 4v5 just because of the fact that Lazarus in mid lane farming right now.
They did get Zapman's beads, though. He got a bit greedy, staying underneath that tier 2 longer than everyone else did. Really wanted to force that down and open up some map pressure for the squad, but that was good. I think it was a long-range stun from Venenu that finally forced his hand to use the beads. They don't even get the tower, so now the Renegades can step up a bit. And you mentioned it, Lasper was in mid, getting some extra much-needed farm that whole time, pushing up the mid wave so that they wouldn't have to worry about a potential push happening at their own tier 2 in mid. That's not too bad of a sequence for the Renegades just now.
It's the weird ebb and flow. If Renegades lose a fight there, it's like, man, Lasper, why weren't you available? You were in mid farming. But because they get that extra, like you pointed out, the ground that they're able to walk forward, saving a tier 2, and getting him the farm that he has drastically needed, 3-2-3, he's technically ahead of Cuvo Fred in keeping himself alive, at least in terms of slash line. A little bit behind in the experience, which is still playing a pretty big role right now. That level 18 versus level 17. It's just the difference in having an extra point in one ability, but honestly, when you're going up against especially something like a Susano, that extra point means a lot in terms of the damage that you're going to be receiving and his mobility. So trying to keep that locked down will be important. Fire Giant's kind of off the board right now for both teams, as I would wager Oni Fury 40 seconds away. Probably something the Knights will look to put pressure on, give them pressure in the waves, which will then allow that open opportunity on the Fire Giant once more.
But Gore, I mean, we've watched over 40 minutes of the Renegades playing here today, and I still can't tell you what their offensive game plan was, what they were doing affirmatively to give themselves a better chance to win, right? In Game 1, Scary D rotated early and often with that Amaterasu aura, right? They got pressure over in the long lane, and then they had Scary D rotate a lot, and they fought around him. And in Game 2, Cubo Fred went over to Scary D. They had pressure in solo. They didn't want to let this Morrigan get off to a good start. They bullied the solo side of the map. I can tell you what the Knights did in both games easily. For the Renegades, though, I don't know. What was the game plan? It felt like, really, they've kind of just watched the Knights beat them for 40 minutes.
And honestly, the draft kind of feels the same way as well. I mean, you want that Morrigan. They wanted it so badly, they locked it in early. They've sent it over to solo lane. And it hasn't necessarily done as much in Game 1 or in Game 2 to make a big difference. Now the Knights are able to maybe force them into a fight they don't want.
They grab the Oni Fury. Now Awesome Jake stuck in no man's land. He's going to get the ultimate off, but land down in a world of pain. Zapman gets the kill credit for it. So that evens up the kills at 7 apiece. Lucky. But what about the fight on the backside? Scary D takes a ton of damage in bargain for and dies up in the air thanks to the last breath. But still, he earns enough for the team. Cubo Fred gets Barracuda, makes it a double by finding the second kill in the Veneno, and Zapman wants to get involved as well as he takes care of SOT. Suddenly, it's just Lasbra up to try and defend for 20 seconds before Awesome Jake gets back. At the very least, that's a left side Phoenix.
Yeah, and I love this because they have the Oni minion wave still pushing down. They don't have to worry about pressure in some of the other lanes. That is going to push up on its own. That's way too much time to run to the Fire Giant. You get this Phoenix, you've got an Oni wave, and then soon enough, one wave, and then Fire minions. Are they going to push for it?
Well, they've got really low health bars. This is certainly risky if the Knights want to call for it, and I think that's why they're backing up your Gore. They were too low. Awesome Jake just respawned, and they can't do it.
I've seen a lot of aggression in this game before, and calls that could be punished and not punished. That is one that, if it goes right, you're singing praise for the Knights, but if it goes wrong, which it's like an 80-10 split of 10% right, or 80 to 90% wrong, you're looking at that as potentially throw territory, right? 3 half-health members, you don't run into the Titan and hope to kill. Instead, you use what aggression you have. Fire minions on the left lane, Oni minions still on the right lane, starting to look to put pressure on that tier 2 that you got down to about 1 hit earlier. It's forcing the Renegades to play defensively, and as you pointed out, it's kind of felt that way now for 50 total minutes of gameplay where they haven't had the ability to aggress into anything. And maybe Jake is the guy to do it. He tried to do it in that last fight, get aggressive, jump in, but by the time he got his ult off, he was already 2 hits away from dead, and then he landed and was 2 hits, 2 dead. So it's still not the open opportunity for Renegades, unless they're going to be able to initiate, again, with this kiss from Lasbra to shut down the healing from Scary D to make sure that pick comes through. I don't know where else their initiation is. It's almost all on this Camazotz and all depending on Lasbra, and it hasn't been consistent enough.
Not much there as Nirmal blinks in and drops the ultimate, but they've got Veneno isolated over on the right side, and they get that Agni easy. He even dumps all the bombs, and it's still nowhere near enough damage to make the Knights hesitate. And look at this pathing from Scary D. He's going for the long-term loop around to try and catch out some stragglers. Awesome Jake transforms, but yet again, all he's really doing is setting himself up for disaster. That's 2 for 0 in favor of the Knights.
Scary could not care less at the damage a tier 2 does right now. I mean, he is just zoning them out, doing exactly what we've seen him do on Warriors. And again, the sustain from Camazotz plays a role early game in terms of helping fend off ganks, and late game here when it comes down to him getting aggressive into your backline. And now you're still 2 members down for 20 seconds. This should easily spell another Phoenix, especially since 2 members of Renegades are over there in left backing.
And they should be able to threaten here in right now. Solar Trolls nearby, Scary D keeping him zoned out. And they've already gotten the left side Phoenix. Barracuda's clearly not going to be here for this defense. They see him on that minion wave and left. So the right side Phoenix comes down for free for the Knights, and now they start to disengage. And this game plan from the Knights, it really seems like part of it is that they're not letting Barracuda get involved at all. Remember that great game he had against Sangwon? He had the quadra kill. We were talking about turning back the clock.
Yeah.
But in this game, the Knights bullied out Awesome Jake in game 1 and got pressure there for that Uller for Zapman. And then in game 2, they took the entirety of the action over to the right side of the map. Barracuda hasn't really gotten to play this set.
Yeah, this is a team that has easily been doing their homework, right? And I mentioned it in the interview prior to this, that both of these teams being 1-3 kind of blows my mind because of how well they've been playing. All 3 of the losses that both of them have tacked up have looked very solid even from them. But this is a Knights team that has studied up on the Renegades. They recognize, how do we force Solo or Troll to be uncomfortable? Where is their win condition? A lot of what we've been talking about has been Lasbred, how much he opens and facilitates. And yeah, 4-2-3, it looks good on paper. But when you look at where his potency has been, it really has just been ults onto Camazotz can equal Camazotz dead, but you have to commit 3 members of the Renegades to follow up on that ult to make sure it happens. Now you've got 5 members on the Knights with Fire Giant pushing down a tier 2, and I don't know if you're, even as a Serket, can jump back there and feel safe about it. In fact, I would say, especially as Serket, you feel unsafe trying to do that.
No, I don't think there's much room for the Renegades to try and take care of Scary D at this point, or for Lasbro really to find much room to move in. They step into the mid Phoenix, or our left Phoenix is back up, but it's really weak at this point, and in right side, Fire Minion should already be pouring. Scary D's gonna back TP back in with a full HP bar. Meanwhile, the Renegades starting to buckle a bit. They already have to send Venenu back to base, and without those Agni bombs, Pittsburgh Knights can afford to step in. Awesome Jake tries to step forward, but we've already seen this story. The second he comes back down from the ultimate, he's gonna die. I think that's why we don't see much Fafnir anymore these days. Can they continue to threaten the mid Phoenix? So Scary D is lurking in the back, waiting to try and catch him out. Cubo Fred goes to take the 1v1 up against Lasbro, said, I saw you lurking. We're going to kick you out of here. Not much that he's going to be able to do. Meanwhile, mid Phoenix continues to get threatened. Scary D now hunting down Lasbro. He does get the blink off, but left Phoenix falls. Barracuda ends up dropping, and that should be it for mid Phoenix as well.
And with Fire Minions pouring in on the right-hand side, 3 kills, mid-Phoenix down. I don't know, Finch, this is not something you come back from if you're Renegades.
No, this should be the end of the game. It's just a question of will the Renegades get anything else on it before the final curtain falls. Venenu drops as well. The Titan is down too low. The minions are swarming, and the Pittsburgh Knights find a clean 2-0.
And what you were saying, it impersonates, or, well, I guess simplifies what this game was into 2 simple terms. Where's the aggression from Renegades going to be, right? Where's the aggression? How are they going to fight? In the first game, it was, can we get Osiris ahead? It was a resounding no. It just never happened. In the second game, it felt like Lasbra, and unfortunately, even though he kept pace, it wasn't enough to open the door for them. So there was a lot of opportunity and a lot of theory, I think, behind it. But at the end of the day, I think the Knights drafted better than they played that draft better. And unfortunately for the Renegades, it ended up being, 2 25-minute games that just slowly but surely burned themselves down.
It really felt like the Renegades weren't quite ever in this set. So congrats to the Knights finding a dominant 2-0 victory. Let's get it back over to Dulce and Myth to break it down.
It is the 2-0 for the Knights, and a 3-0 set for Paul. Paul is Paul, by the way. I can call him that, and because we're on a first-name basis, because we're so tight. And another guy that I'm tight with, Mifflin, is with me to talk about the Knights and the Renegades. And Mifflin, how this one just ended up being a 2-0.
Good copy pasta. That 2-0, I think Finch really hit on it. No, it was good, bud. Chat loved it, I'm sure. Finch hit on it at the end there. They didn't allow, PK that is, they didn't allow Barracuda to really get a game going. Yep. They shifted the aggression to make sure it was focused either on to Barracuda or so far away that it doesn't matter that Barracuda's going even. And I think that's really smart. He's one of the best players on that squad. They know that Renegades like to play through him a lot. And I think a lot of Renegades' issue really does come down to the draft, as Gore pointed out. We saw a huge focus on this Morgan, and they got it. They got Morgan both games, but they didn't draft around it. They picked Morgan just for the sake of having it, throwing it over in the soul lane, not where she's going to be comfortable. Picking her in mid doesn't really matter. You don't have anything that's going to be able to back her up defensively, so she's got dove the entirety of game 1. I think there's some lacking of cohesion in the picks, but in game 2, it was a lot more competitive. There was a lot more kills going back and forth in the early, but unfortunately for Renegades, when they traded out, Renegades had to back up and lick their wounds. PK backed up and got Gold Fury.
I am curious, though, Mifflin, maybe to take a step back from this game specifically and maybe Now a topic of conversation around Morrigan. 0 for 2 on the day, now 0 for 2 in the SPL. Obviously, Renegades really trying to force it today. Do you think Morrigan as a god moving forward is something teams will start to feel comfortable adding into their game plan a little bit more?
Absolutely. Morgan is so absolutely strong. She brings high CC. She's got insane burst potential. Her late game is nearly unparalleled. She can play as anyone in the lobby. This god is strong. I think the only failing we saw is that there really wasn't a draft that was meant to work around her.
Sure. And I like I don't mind maybe the Renegades' creativity, but let's talk about the Knights and really a lot of what we saw here today. And I think this is an important win for them because the Renegades absolutely not a team to scoff at despite being down at 1-4, but a net improvement, I think, in the play style that we've seen from the Knights. In the rotations, the jungle play from Cuvo looked good. A great game in the mid lane there from Paul. Where does your confidence stand with this Knights roster, especially after a win like this moving forward?
I'm feeling really good if I'm the Knights. We don't put Paul on one of his priority picks. He's not playing Hell. He's not playing Hebo.
Yep.
He's playing Merlin. That's more standard. And we saw that he was a complete force to be reckoned with in Game 2. He was stopping all sorts of aggression coming out from the enemy team. Anytime they try to engage, Ice Storm falls down. They have to back up. Paul looked very comfortable on this god that we haven't seen him play too often. There's a lot going for them that I like. Their drafts were very cohesive. They had a game plan and they stuck to it. They drafted for early game pressure, so they go for it. They draft for a more mid-game focused comp, they go for that. It was very clean, decisive, clinical Smite play.
What do you think the takeaway is now from the Renegades? They've lost their last couple of sets, looking to get some momentum going. It's been tough sledding here for them. A bit of a different day for Lasbra. Not as these high kill kind of solo-y performances that we're used to. What do you think Renegades work on after a tough loss here to the Knights?
It's not even that they're playing poorly. I think really it did come down to the drafts today. And they've shown time and time again that they are an incredibly strong team. They've had strong individual performances. They had strong team performances. I think today is something you just say, well, we woke up, we weren't feeling too good, we didn't play at our best. Let's put it behind us, move forward, work on our drafts a little bit, and just bring our 100 to the next set.
Well, their next set is up against Radiance next week, so not quite an easy turnaround for them. Though Radiance, they've told us they are, or we saw Adapting's tweet, they are, knocked down a little bit on the ego, but not humbled just yet. But that'll be next week. Let's see what we got for tomorrow, Sunday, to round out this week in the SPL. E-United looking to get some momentum going up against SSG, fresh off a 2-0 win over Obey on Friday. And then the Knights back in action up against Sanguine. So some great matchups on Sunday, Mifflin. What are you looking forward to?
E-United versus SSG is really the standout to me, but I can't not get excited for a Vamos moment out of Sanguine. Sunday is going to be a pretty stacked day. I'm stoked.
Well, every team in the league has played 5 games up at this point, so these standings will be accurate, at least with where everyone has played. And those top 3, neck and neck. Big game tomorrow to try to move Sanguine down to 4-2, and that would move the Knights then up to even at 3-3. Still surprising to see Sanguine that up high, I think. Somehow it's still surprising, but I have big expectations for them tomorrow. Do you think they defend that 4-1 up against the Knights?
Last time we saw Sanguine is the best performance I think we saw from Sanguine. And if they're going to keep bringing that forward, I'm not surprised to see him at the top. I'm not surprised to see him winning games. At this point, I'd be surprised to see them lose.
That's a fair point. I think that's maybe now where the surprise shifts for the Sanguine boys. It was a great day of SPL today. Started off with a top of the table matchup, moved to a bottom of the table matchup, but 4 games, Mifflin, all of them very quick, all of them sub 30 minutes, one right on that cusp of 30 minutes, but it's Rival and it's Knights who come away with the 2-0 wins. That's all we have for you today. Make sure to come back tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern time for more SPL. E-United SSG will kick us off. Knights Sanguine will round us out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you then.